What was once a narrow trail traveled by Native American Indians, and later emerging as a horse path cutting through swampy ravines during the early 17th century. 235 years later, it was famously termed the most historic avenue in all of America by Franklin D. Roosevelt. Visiting the Duke of Gloucester Street in Colonial Williamsburg can quickly conjure up visions of British redcoats, American patriots, fife and drums and musket fire. The founding fathers like George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Patrick Henry, James Madison, and other famous American patriots were known to walk its pathway. Sarah and I are here in downtown Colonial Williamsburg, the early capital of Colonial Virginia, and today we invite you along for a first-person view of an entire walk up and down this historically significant road. Our walk along the Duke of Gloucester Street is roughly a mile long, both up and back, starting on its west side across the street from the College of William and Mary, and all the way over to the Capitol building on its farther east side. Throughout our walk, we'll briefly stop by to see and learn about some of the interesting landmarks found along this 1-mile colonial street. Upon reaching the Capitol building, we'll traverse back down the opposite side of the street and explore some of its other historical points of interest along our stroll. If you've never visited Colonial Williamsburg and have even the slightest curiosity about American history, come along with us on a curious walk with a first-person view up and down the entire Duke of Gloucester Street. A guided tour along a historic pathway, complete with sights, sounds, and interesting stories throughout. Let's begin our walk. As you begin to walk down Duke of Gloucester Street, it could be said it's like returning to that early period in the 18th century, when the British Empire ruled the colonial capital of Williamsburg, Virginia, and other colonies throughout British America. On its west side, closest to the College of William and Mary, is where we'll begin our walk in what's called Merchant Square, one of the first planned shopping districts in America. It's here where you can find delicious food venues, a general store, retail shops, fine dining, and more, all with an 18th and early 19th century architectural design, giving your time spent here a superb colonial feel. This area was known as Middle Plantation before Sir Francis Nicholson, a colonial official who served as governor of the colony of Virginia, would officially rename it Williamsburg in honor of King of England William III. Williamsburg eventually became the capital of the Virginian colony after the Jamestown State House burnt down during the Bacon's Rebellion, an uprising that took place in 1676, which was the first rebellion in the American colonies. All up and down the street, you can see the uniqueness of the colonial period homes, of which some of their surviving structures are restored to their original appearance, stemming from the 18th century. During late fall and winter seasons, the Liberty Ice Pavilion is staged right at the center of Duke of Gloucester Street, giving visitors to Colonial Williamsburg an opportunity to enjoy ice skating right on the historic avenue, an enjoyable activity for friends and family, all while breathing in the brisk Virginian air. So it was in 1699, the colonial legislature of Virginia had decided to name this street after William, Duke of Gloucester, the son of Queen Anne, and actually declared that it would be forever titled the Duke of Gloucester Street. Crossing over Nassau Street and passing by the Bowden-Aumistead home, a smaller trek east along the path down Duke of Gloucester Street will lead you to a significant structure that resided in the fields of Middle Plantation long before becoming Williamsburg. Bruton Parish Church. The first church was built in year 1660, speculated to have been built entirely of wood, and may not have actually dwelled on this plot of land. In 1677, a parish vestry ordered a second church to be built here at this location off Duke of Gloucester Street. Bruton Parish Church had many well-known attendees amongst its congregation. Founding fathers and other signatories of the Declaration of Independence like George Washington, George Wythe, Thomas Jefferson, Patrick Henry, and other key figures of the American Revolution all attended services at the parish. After the deterioration of the second church, a third church was ordered to be built here and is the current structure you see here today, finished in year 1715. The church was used as a storage house and hospital during the Battle of Yorktown, and then later as a Union hospital that kept both Union and Confederate soldiers during the Battle of Williamsburg in the Civil War period. Continuing east past Bruton Parish, you'll come to the Palace Green, a road and long stretch of lawn that leads straight back to reveal the Governor's Palace. Take a walk back through here, get a closer vantage point to the Governor's Palace. And I think actually we'll just walk right down the middle of the Palace Green so we can have a visual on the actual palace as we walk. Designed to be the focal point of leadership within the colony, the governor's residence lied within a vista of beauty right off the Duke of Gloucester Street. In the early construction of the palace, there were some financial disputes that led to the release of its original contractor. Later, Alexander Spotswood was commissioned lieutenant governor and placed urgency on the finalization of the palace, but requested more spending in the pursuit of completing construction. The House of Burgesses, who had grown tired of Spotswood's increased expenditures and request for intricate design and embellishments, though debatable, might have led to the decision to first give the name of the residence Palace in 1714. Yeah, it says here the Governor's Palace was the home of 5 royal lieutenant governors, 2 royal governors, and the first 2 governors of the Commonwealth of Virginia, Patrick Henry and Thomas Jefferson. Here's an interesting find right here off the Palace Green. On the grounds of the nation's first theater, archaeological findings discovered that the original theater foundation was 30 feet wide and over 86 feet in length, and was projected to be 2 stories tall, which is proportionate to many of the English playhouse theaters of that time period. The Playhouse resume includes the first recorded performance in honor of King George I, and later performances by students of the College of William and Mary and other amateur performers. A notable interest, Francis Nicholson, the governor who renamed Middle Plantation to Williamsburg, also decided to bear his name on 2 streets that run just above and below Duke of Gloucester Street. Nicholson Street to the north and the road south, Francis Street. In regards to the early design of Duke of Gloucester Street, the General Assembly had determined, now more than 300 years ago in the year 1705, that the street was to be made 99 feet wide and run almost a mile from the College of William and Mary straight ahead to the Capitol building. Further along up ahead lies the courthouse of Colonial Williamsburg, a landmark that has many interesting facts regarding its design and history. From the steps of the courthouse, a clerk of court named Benjamin Waller read the Declaration of Independence to the people of the colony. Here, an entourage of colonial officials traveled down the Duke of Gloucester Street to arrive at the courthouse to announce the end of the Revolutionary War via the Treaty of Paris. The building's architect is unknown to this very day, but chose a unique symmetry in its design, which encompassed brick arches over its windows. The height of its weather vane matched the width of the courthouse, and faint color accents were added to its brickwork to add compositional definition. Also, the structure did not include pillars on the faceward side of the building. The popular hit television show Turn, which tells the story of General Washington's Culper spy ring, filmed many scenes here in Williamsburg off the Duke of Gloucester Street. The courthouse in Williamsburg appears as a post office in the show. From this vantage point during a scene, Peggy Shippen asked a young boy to deliver an anonymous letter at the post office. It notified Congress word of Benedict Arnold's betrayal, stating he's working with the British. Most scenes from the show portray Williamsburg as the city of Philadelphia. largely reconstructed, this area will always remain the exact place on Earth where the early idea for American independence was formed in the minds of our founding fathers. It's astounding to think, right here, they visualized a path to freedom, rehearsed famous speeches, and drafted well-known historical resolutions, right here from within the city. Some of the early trades of 18th century Williamsburg included brickmakers, blacksmiths, shoemakers, tailors, and silversmiths. All along the road, you could find everything from drugstores, wig makers, and taverns to dining halls, cabinet makers, and gunsmiths. As you continue to walk further down the street, passing by old homes and storefronts, you can only begin to imagine what sorts of conversation, planning, and intellect was exchanged between travelers on foot en route towards the Capitol building. What hopes and dreams were envisioned and sought out by slaves, townspeople, and colonial families in the midst of ever-tightening British rule. And finally, we arrive here at the Raleigh Tavern, one of the larger taverns in Williamsburg during that period. The tavern was named after Sir Walter Raleigh, a notable figure from the early English settlement in Virginia. The entranceway of the tavern includes his lead bust overhead, shown here. The tavern was a well-known place and popular meeting spot for legislators and city officials in the pre-Revolution era. The royal governors dissolved the House of Burgesses, the elected legislators, after resolution pushback opposing the Townshend Acts. So it was, the Apollo Room within the tavern became a casual meeting place for the Burgesses after its split. Young Thomas Jefferson once penned a letter describing a night spent at a jubilant ball at the Apollo Room. His letter reveals his affection to a female attendee named Belinda. He conceded in his writing to his foolery and drunken stupor that led to his tarnished attempt to exchange conversation with her, of which he acknowledges in his letter. Finally, arriving here at the far east side of Duke of Gloucester Street lies the Capitol building. The timeline for this structure began after the State House in Jamestown was destroyed due to fire, and thereafter a decision was made to move government to what would eventually be renamed Williamsburg. Legislators had decided to build a structure on this site that would earn the first usage of the word Capitol. In total, this is the third constructed Capitol building on this site. The first State House raised here in 1705 was originally built with no fireplaces or chimneys, but after complaints of muggy, dampened interior throughout the building, chimneys and fireplaces were eventually built on. In year 1747, the first Capitol building was found in flames. A second Capitol building was eventually rebuilt between 1751 through 1753. There, Patrick Henry delivered his famous speech in which he condemned the encroachment of Parliament regarding the Stamp Act, the first tax levied by the British on the American colonists. Here in the Capitol building, icons of the American Revolution debated and prevailed against the British tyranny that gripped the colonists of Virginia. The second Capitol building in Williamsburg concluded its commission on Christmas Eve in 1779, with the government reassembling at the new Capitol in Richmond, Virginia, the following spring in 1780. This, the third Capitol building, was reconstructed using the superior documentation found from the first Capitol building, which was determined to be more intriguing architecture and design in comparison to the second Capitol building. At the far east side of Duke of Gloucester Street, swinging past the Capitol building, begins your return walk down the opposite side of the street, headed back towards our original starting point. On this side of the street, our quest should offer up even more interesting landmarks and findings. Walking down the Duke of Gloucester Street can shed light on the early building codes put in place during the early days of growth in Williamsburg for the colonial dwellings that run along both sides of the street. Their requirements mandated each building was built on a half-acre lot, with buildings at least 30 feet wide and 20 feet in length. A roofing pitch of 10 feet was required. A short walk down the opposite side of Duke of Gloucester Street brings you to a well-known place of merriment, a local gathering spot for many prestigious figures, including burgesses, city officials, and famous founding fathers of America, King's Arms Tavern. It's reported that George Washington and Thomas Jefferson were known patrons of the tavern and tilted pints of ale within its walls. The tavern was a source of retrieving colonial news and information, as you would find broadsides and legislative resolutions hung on its exterior walls. Exchanging banter with fellow customers and even eavesdropping were both common means of learning the colonial headlines or rumors at that time. The tavern was founded in 1772 and was run by a woman named Jane Vobe. It was thought that she learned the business and gained her experience of operating the tavern and others from her husband, Thomas Vobe. She was well respected with a stellar reputation, and many well-to-do men would frequent her tavern because the amenities she provided and its ideal location off the Duke of Gloucester Street. The ghost of Jane Vobe is said to still live at the establishment, with many current-day staff of the tavern reporting eerie stories and sightings of her lingering around the halls and rooms of the venue. Others believe the hauntings at the tavern are actually due to another woman named Irma who used to work there. With two different stories that have been circulated. One states she died in a fire in the 17th century. The other account reporting she was an employee at the tavern much later in time and died in the upstairs bedroom at the tavern due to heart failure. As you continue walking down the Duke of Gloucester Street, a vision of a young George Washington comes to mind, as he was known to have visited the city to apply for a surveyor's license at the College of William and Mary when he was just 17 years old. Williamsburg is known to be the center staging point from where George Washington assembled orders and expedited plans and strategies that provided support and reinforcements to American forces in their efforts to defeat General Cornwallis at Yorktown. As a young military officer early in his career, Williamsburg was the base of operations, and George Washington was known to traverse to and from this area during various battles and expeditions. One such mission took place after the House of Burgesses denied funding for an armed mission against the French over land dispute along the Ohio River Valley. After their refusal, Lieutenant Governor Dinwiddie accepted Washington's offer to act as a diplomatic representative to the French and agreed upon a special mission that involved delivering a letter from the governor to French commanders to confirm the land was the property of the Crown of Great Britain and suggested continued peace between them, but also requested their departure from the area. Washington was to deliver the letter from the governor and evaluate French forces, their position and communications while waiting for a reply. With a hired guide, porters, and Indian escort party in place, they trekked to various French-held forts in the valley, but each fort's French commander was reluctant to receive the letter. Washington eventually determined the French were a threat to Indian allegiances as well as to Great Britain, and begun an agonizing return back to Williamsburg to inform Lieutenant Governor Dinwiddie. This was the onset of the French and Indian War, which took place from 1754 to 1763. On the opposite side of the road to the courthouse, you'll find Market Square, the central site at the center of Duke of Gloucester Street, where public recreation, county fairs, marketplaces, ammunition training, and public auctions were held. On the south side of Market Square lied the magazine, or also referred to as the Powder Horn. The octagonal-shaped brick building the General Assembly had ordered Governor Spotswood to construct in 1714 to store the colony's arms, munitions, and supplies. Gunpowder, flints, swords, flintlocks, tents, and cooking utensils were only a few items stored here to guard against the threat of potential Indian attacks, pirate raids, slave revolts, and local uprisings. Many years later, an event took place at the magazine of which was directly responsible for sparking and igniting the fuse that finally led to the revolution of the colonies. The last royal governor of the Virginian colony, Lord Dunmore, born John Murray, ordered an armed schooner to position itself outside the city on the James River and send in a guard unit from the Royal Navy to plot course by night to steal away barrels of gunpowder and firearms that were stored at the magazine. On a Thursday evening in 1775, they went forth with their plan. Dunmore blamed suspicion of a slave revolt as the reason for robbing the Powder Horn, after the city officials eased tensions by sending a delegation to Governor Dunmore requesting an explanation. Later in Richmond at the Second Virginia Convention, Patrick Henry argued each county should put in place its own volunteer infantry. His speech there included the famous line, "Give me liberty or give me death." Later, a militia led by Patrick Henry himself marched toward Williamsburg with hundreds of armed men to demand restitution for the stolen powder, and contributed to the resistance that led to the revolution of British control throughout the colonies. These incidents caused a chain reaction up the entire Atlantic coast, and colonial patriots in different colonies began hiding away their gunpowder to keep it from being confiscated by the British. In 1759, George Washington would finally be elected as a sitting member of the House of Burgesses, drafting bills, serving committees and forming the early idea of self-government throughout his years of service here. He was later chosen to be a part of the Virginia delegation to the First Continental Congress in 1774. In later years, George Washington returned to Williamsburg and more than likely rode center down Duke of Gloucester Street, but now serving as the commander-in-chief of the newly formed American Army. After marrying his wife, Martha, they honeymooned in Williamsburg. Roughly 160 miles from his home in Mount Vernon, Washington would spend time with his stepchildren, wife, and family at an estate situated not far from Bruton Parish Church. And a quick peek here at Hartwell Perry's Tavern. The information sign on the exterior of the building states a man named John Custis IV built a rental property here in 1717. Then, after the Revolution, a man named Hartwell Perry purchased the building and ran it as a tavern beginning in 1782 through 1800. When visiting Colonial Williamsburg, a walk up and down the Duke of Gloucester Street can unleash plenty of historical intrigue and fascination. To explore the innermost part of the city, where our founding fathers plotted a road to revolution, is sure to heighten one's awareness of the significance of our freedom and their quest to find it. Like any restraint that seeks liberation, early inhabitants that made up Colonial Williamsburg lived in an era of time that had no certainties or promises. On this very street, early American patriots in different classes of society went about their daily lives, foraging for a better existence and eventually seeking and finding the will to fight for colonial independence. Seeing and learning the stories surrounding the land, homes, taverns, storefronts, government buildings, and its many acres of historical mystery will forever be a destination that appeals to those seeking a better understanding of our desire to be a self-governed, free nation. A walk through the town fills you with wonderment and leaves you imagining what it might have been like to exist at that point in time. Each discovery remaining reveals its own unique account, worthy to be told and understood as a visitor to the city and as a citizen of this great country. The mile of road that is Duke of Gloucester Street lies here today as it did then. It truly is a living history museum that can be traveled by modern-day pioneers like me and you. The city and its principal street will constantly serve as a compelling reminder of a pivotal period in our journey to become our own free nation, with rights to live and pursue happiness throughout our walk in life.